An elderly woman's act of compassion, taking in two dogs shivering in the cold, would have unexpected consequences. By the next morning, her home was surrounded by police. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe and let us know where you're watching from. Amelia Campos watched the snow fall through the fogged-up window of her chalet. At 78, she had grown accustomed to the solitude that came with the harsh winters in Santa Helena. The small mountain town seemed even more isolated when the cold arrived with its full force. The wind howled outside as she fed the wood-burning stove, her faithful companion on frigid nights. The familiar scent of burning pine filled the air, mingling with the aroma of the herbal tea she brewed every evening. Amelia settled into her rocking chair, the same one that had been creaking for over a decade, a silent witness to her solitary life since she'd been widowed. The storm outside was growing in intensity. The branches of nearby trees scraped against the chalet's outer walls, as if pleading to come inside. The old woman wrapped her late husband's woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders and closed her eyes for a moment. It was then that she heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible whimper amidst the roar of the storm. Amelia stood, confused, thinking perhaps it was just the wind playing tricks on her aging imagination. But the sound came again, clearer this time, a sharp cry coming from her porch. With hesitant steps, she walked to the door. Her wrinkled fingers turned the knob as her heart began to beat faster. A blast of icy wind invaded the room as the door swung open, carrying with it small snowflakes that danced around her feet. And there, trembling and covered in a fine layer of snow, were two German shepherd puppies. Their tiny paws could barely hold them upright, and their eyes pleaded for help. Without a moment's hesitation, the old woman scooped the small animals into her arms. "You poor things, nearly frozen," she murmured, feeling the tremors of their fragile bodies. Amelia wrapped the puppies in a wool blanket she kept near the entrance and carried them close to the fire. Kneeling with difficulty, she began to gently rub their fur to warm them. The little ones looked up at her with an almost human gratitude. As she cared for the puppies, something inside her warmed as well. It was a long-forgotten feeling of being needed, of having someone to care for. Silent tears streamed down her wrinkled face. She didn't know where the dogs had come from, or how they had found their way to her door in the middle of a blizzard. But at that moment, sitting on the floor of her living room with two small beings depending on her, Amelia felt the winter in her own heart finally begin to thaw. The alarm on the old wall clock had not yet sounded when Amelia Campos was awakened by an unusual glare piercing through her lace curtains. Pulsing red and blue lights reflected off the accumulated snow, illuminating the chalet's walls like a strange dawn. She rose with difficulty, her bones protesting the cold, and walked to the window. What she saw made her heart race. 3 police cars were surrounding her house. The puppies, who had been sleeping peacefully by the wood stove, lifted their ears in alert. Amelia took a deep breath, trying to calm the trembling in her hands. In nearly 8 decades of life, she had never received a visit from the police. Firm knocks echoed on the door. When she opened it, she was met by 2 uniformed officers. The older one, with a rigid posture and a penetrating gaze, introduced himself. "Sergeant Elias Morera, ma'am. This is Officer Raquel Martins. We need to speak with you about an urgent matter." Raquel, a younger woman with a gentler expression, offered a faint smile, trying to ease the tension hanging in the air. Amelia invited them in, more out of custom than desire. The sergeant removed his cap, his trained eyes scanning the room, finally settling on the puppies, who were now partially hidden behind the wood basket. "Mrs. Campos, Elias began. "We're looking for two dogs that disappeared last night. From the looks of it, you've found them." The old woman felt her blood run cold. "They were nearly frozen on my porch. I only did what any decent person would do." Raquel approached the animals carefully. "They're part of a special, confidential project. They aren't ordinary puppies." "What kind of project leaves little animals out in the snow?" Amelia questioned, her indignation momentarily overcoming her fear. The sergeant exchanged a look with his partner before answering. "They weren't abandoned, ma'am. There was an incident during transport. We need to take them back." Through the window, Amelia noticed curious neighbors watching the police cars. In Santa Helena, news traveled faster than rain down a hillside. By the end of the day, the entire town would be buzzing with speculation about why the police had surrounded the lonely old woman's house on the mountain. "What kind of dogs are so important they require this whole operation?" she asked, gesturing toward the commotion outside. "Unfortunately, we are not authorized to give details," Elias replied, his discomfort evident. "But I can assure you, this is a security matter that is more than it appears." The puppies, as if understanding the gravity of the situation, moved closer to Amelia, pressing against her trembling legs as if seeking protection. Inside the chalet, the scent of wood smoke and freshly brewed coffee filled the air. Amelia Campos settled the officers in her small living room while the puppies slept, curled up in an old blanket near the stove. "I found the poor things shivering on my porch last night, during the storm," the old woman explained, gently stroking one of the dog's still stiff paws. "I couldn't just let them freeze to death." Sergeant Elias Morera watched with a serious expression, while Raquel Martins approached the puppies with visible tenderness. The young officer knelt and murmured something softly to one of them, which remained still. "Sitsin," she said suddenly, testing a hunch. To everyone's surprise, the puppy immediately sat, attentive. Raquel repeated the command with the second dog, getting the same obedient response. "They respond to German commands," the officer noted, exchanging a meaningful glance with her partner. "This confirms they're the project dogs." Amelia frowned, confused. "What project is that? They're just abandoned puppies." The sergeant cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "Ma'am, for legal reasons, these animals must be handed over to the station immediately. They belong to a specific program." The old woman's expression hardened. Her 78 years had taught her to recognize when someone was hiding something. "I'm not handing these little ones over to die in a cold cage." Raquel intervened, sensing the rising tension. "They're clearly still weak, Sergeant. Perhaps it would be better to leave them here until they've recovered." Elias pondered for a few moments, glancing out the window at the heavy sky that promised more snow. Finally, he nodded. "We can make a temporary arrangement," he conceded. "You may keep the puppies under your provisional custody, but we will need to make regular visits to monitor them. And you are not to mention this to anyone in town." Amelia visibly relaxed, a smile softening her time-worn face. "You can come by whenever you like. These little ones won't be any trouble." Before leaving, Raquel leaned in close to the old woman and whispered, "Thank you for taking care of them. Few people would have the heart." The sergeant left specific instructions for their feeding and care, but Amelia noticed he avoided looking directly at the puppies, as if he carried some kind of guilt. When the officers finally left, the old woman locked the door and returned to the sleeping dogs. "What's so special about you two?" she murmured to herself, watching the small animals who unknowingly had brought so much mystery into her solitary life. In the days that followed, Amelia Campos observed the puppies with renewed attention. As they recovered, Thor and Nina, as she'd begun to call them, revealed behaviors that went far beyond what was expected of simple lost dogs. Whenever someone approached the chalet, the animals would position themselves strategically, one on each side of the door, like trained sentinels. In the middle of the night, Nina would prick up her ears at the slightest distant noise, long before Amelia could hear a thing. Thor, meanwhile, seemed to patrol the house, checking windows and doors as if performing a surveillance routine. Intrigued, the old woman began to jot down these patterns in an old notebook. One cold afternoon, as she was brushing Nina's coat near the fire, Amelia felt something hard beneath her fingers. Gently parting the animal's thick fur, she found a small metallic capsule attached to the collar, almost imperceptible. The cylindrical object, the size of a bean, seemed to have been carefully camouflaged. "What is this, my little one?" the woman murmured, adjusting her glasses to get a better look. The capsule had no visible markings, but it had a distinct texture, as if made from a special material. Amelia tried to remove it, but it was firmly attached. Thor drew near, watching her every move intently, as if he understood the importance of the discovery. That night, Amelia couldn't sleep. Her late husband had worked with training dogs decades ago, and she knew this was no simple ornament. She needed help, but she didn't trust just anyone with something so mysterious. The next morning, she walked to the village grocery and left a message for Caleb Silva, a young man who occasionally chopped wood for the locals. He appeared late that afternoon, his hands calloused and his gaze characteristically low. "You sent for me, Mrs. Campos?" he asked shyly, standing on the threshold. "Come in, son. I need your help with something different," Amelia replied, motioning for him to sit. The old woman showed Caleb the capsule, explaining the animal's strange behaviors. The young man examined the object with curiosity, turning it carefully between his fingers. "I've never seen anything like this, Mrs. Campos. It looks too technological to be on a dog collar," he commented, frowning. "I can look it up on the library computer." Amelia nodded, offering the young man a bowl of hot soup. As they ate in silence, the puppies remained alert, as if they understood perfectly the conversation that had just taken place. A new routine settled in. Caleb would arrive early, feed the dogs, chop enough wood to keep the chalet warm, and clear the snow when the weather allowed. In return, Amelia prepared hearty meals and let him sleep on the sofa on nights when his father was, as the young man discreetly put it, having his bad days. The presence of Caleb and the puppies transformed the atmosphere. The chalet, once as silent as a tomb, now echoed with lively barks, the rhythmic chop of an axe, and even occasional laughter when Thor would unsuccessfully try to hide the old woman's slippers. One afternoon, as she watched the boy playing in the snow with the dogs, Amelia caught herself smiling openly. How long had it been since she had smiled like that? Years, perhaps. Not since Raoul, her husband, had passed. She had closed herself off in her small world, pushing everyone and everything away. "You should smile more," Caleb commented upon his return, his cheeks flushed from the cold. "It makes you look younger." Amelia feigned indignation, but her heart warmed. For the first time in a very long time, the chalet was no longer just a place to exist. It was becoming a home again. As the cold afternoon wind blew against the chalet's windows, 3 firm knocks echoed through the room. Amelia Campos paused her preparations for chamomile tea and walked slowly to the door, adjusting the shawl over her shoulders. When she opened it, she was met by a tall man in an impeccable dark overcoat that contrasted sharply with the simplicity of her home. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I am Dr. Henrique Kraus, a representative of the federal government," he announced, his voice deep, his accent betraying a foreign origin. "I am here for an official inspection of the dogs you found." Amelia hesitated, but let him in. The visitor's analytical eyes swept the room, cataloging every detail of the modest cottage. Thor and Nina, who had been playing on the rug near the wood stove, immediately went on alert, positioning themselves side by side in a defensive stance. "Interesting," the man murmured, approaching the pups. "They exhibit coordinated behavior typical of advanced training." As the doctor made notes in a small book, the old woman offered him tea, more out of politeness than desire. He refused with a curt gesture and began firing questions. Where exactly had she found them? Had they responded to specific commands? Were they carrying anything when they arrived? "The police have already asked me all of this," Amelia replied, a growing discomfort settling in. "I understand, but my investigation is more thorough," Kraus insisted, crouching to examine the animals' collars. "These dogs are part of a confidential project. Any detail could be crucial." From the corner of the room, Caleb watched the scene in silence. The young man had arrived minutes earlier with firewood, and now remained leaning against the wall, arms crossed. Noticing his wary gaze, the visitor straightened up quickly. "And who might this young man be?" he asked with false cordiality. "I just help Amelia with a few things," Caleb answered, not moving a muscle. The elegant man offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes and turned his attention back to the pups. When he tried to touch Nina, the dog recoiled with a low growl. Thor moved to stand in front of her, a guardian. "Curious how they seem to be protecting this house," Kraus commented, an unsettling glint in his eye. "I will return soon to continue our conversation, Mrs. Campos. The federal government appreciates your temporary cooperation." After he left, Amelia locked the door with trembling hands. She exchanged a worried glance with Caleb, while the puppies remained on high alert, as if they could still sense the danger that had just walked out the door. Amelia Campos awoke before dawn, as was her custom. As the wood stove spread its warmth through the cottage, she busied herself with her morning cleaning. When she approached the corner where Thor and Nina had slept, she noticed something unusual on the female's collar. A small, brown paper envelope, sealed with red wax and attached by a sturdy thread. "How did this get here?" the old woman murmured, adjusting her glasses to get a better look. Her wrinkled hands trembled slightly as she detached the envelope. Inside was a slip of paper covered in strange symbols, numbers, and letters that formed no recognizable words. When Caleb arrived to chop wood, Amelia called him over immediately. The boy stomped the snow from his boots as he entered, his eyes lighting up when he saw the mysterious envelope. "Amelia, this looks like some kind of code," he said, holding the paper up to the light from the window. Neither Sergeant Elias nor Raquel mentioned anything about this during their visits. The young man carefully tucked the paper into the pocket of his worn jacket. "I'll look into this. I can use the computer at the public library." That afternoon, while Amelia was preparing a manioc broth, Caleb returned, his eyes shining with excitement. He sat at the rustic kitchen table and spread out several printed sheets. "I found information on military and espionage codes," he explained, showing the images to the old woman. "This one looks like a substitution cipher, where each symbol represents a letter or a word." Amelia served 2 mugs of tea while watching the pups, who seemed strangely attentive to the conversation. Nina, especially, never took her eyes off the envelope. "Do you think these dogs are involved in something dangerous?" she asked, lowering her voice. Caleb bit his lip, thoughtful. "I don't know, but that man, Dr. Kraus, he didn't seem trustworthy. And why would ordinary dogs obey commands in German?" Night fell quickly over the mountains. As they worked on the code, Thor's ears suddenly shot up. He ran to the window, growling into the darkness outside. "Someone's watching us," Caleb whispered, quickly switching off the table lamp. A shiver ran down Amelia's spine. The peaceful life she had known for so many years had unraveled into a mystery she couldn't fully comprehend. But one thing she knew: those puppies had come to her door for a reason, and now they were all caught up in something far bigger than they could imagine. "Tomorrow," she said, a firmness in her elderly voice that was unusual. "We need to talk to Raquel. If there's something hidden in this code, we have to find out what it is before it's too late." Caleb arrived at the cottage breathless that morning. His restless eyes scanned the property as he knocked on Amelia's door. When she opened it, he hurried inside, closing it firmly behind him. "There are strangers snooping around," he whispered, pulling back the curtain to peer out the window. "I saw a black car parked at the bend in the road. It's the 3rd day in a row." A chill ran down Amelia's spine. The puppies, as if sensing the tension, drew close to her, their ears pricked. Thor positioned himself between the old woman and the window, while Nina sniffed insistently at the back door. "I woke up to a noise last night," she confessed, pouring an herbal tea to calm their nerves. "I thought it was just the wind, but Thor wouldn't stop growling at the kitchen window." The boy ran a hand through his disheveled hair. He had started sleeping a few nights a week in the small back room, worried for her safety. Together, they reinforced the window latches and checked that all the entrances were secure. The following afternoon, the familiar rumble of a patrol car's engine broke the tense silence. Sergeant Elias Morera parked some distance from the house, looking around before approaching. His face wore an uncharacteristic gravity. "We need to talk, Amelia," he said, stepping inside quickly. The officer refused coffee, remaining on his feet. "The situation is more delicate than we imagined." Elias explained that the project the dogs came from had been shut down abruptly, but that powerful people still had an interest in the animals. He didn't go into detail, but his worried gaze said more than his words. "Keep everything you've discovered about the puppies in absolute secrecy," he recommended, his voice low. "Don't mention the envelope, the capsule, anything, not even to people you know." Caleb, watching silently from the corner of the room, noted how the sergeant avoided using names. As the officer prepared to leave, Thor and Nina stood side by side like sentinels. "I'll increase patrols in the area," Elias assured them, adjusting his holster. "And Raquel will come by tomorrow to check on things. Any suspicious movement, call me immediately." After his departure, a heavy silence fell over the cottage. Amelia looked at the puppies, then at the young man who had become a part of her life, and felt the weight of responsibility. She never imagined that at 78, she would be at the center of a mystery that seemed to grow deeper with each passing day. "We'll be all right, Vomea," Caleb said, using the affectionate nickname for the first time. "I won't let anything happen to you or to them." The wind whistled through the cracks in the roof as Amelia Campos searched the dusty attic. Her wrinkled fingers rummaged through old trunks, looking for woolen clothes to keep Caleb warm on these cold nights. The boy had become a constant presence in her life, bringing light to days that had once seemed endless. That's when her eyes fell on a wooden box hidden under a pile of blankets. As she opened it, her heart tightened. Inside were dozens of photos, yellowed with time, fragments of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. The old woman ran trembling fingers over the smiling face of Raoul, her husband, who had been gone for more than 15 years. One photograph in particular made her blood run cold. Raoul, in his white lab coat and thick-rimmed glasses, was smiling next to a man with harsh features and a rigid posture. Even younger, he was unmistakable. It was the same man who had introduced himself as Dr. Enrique Krauss just days ago. "Dear God," she murmured, sitting down on the nearest trunk. The memories flooded back in an avalanche. For years, Raoul had worked as a lab assistant at the Federal University, taking part in behavioral research with dogs. He spoke little of his work, but Amelia remembered the nights he would come home troubled, questioning the ethics of certain experiments. She made her way down the attic stairs with difficulty, clutching the photograph to her chest. In the living room, Thor and Nina perked up their ears, alert to her worried expression. The old woman placed the image on the kitchen table, studying every detail under the dim light of the lamp. It can't be a coincidence, she thought, recalling the enigmatic words Raoul used to repeat in his final days. Some knowledge should remain buried. The metal capsule found on one of the puppy's collars, the coded envelope, the German commands. It all began to make a terrible kind of sense. Amelia felt the weight of her age as the pieces clicked into place. These were not simply abandoned dogs. They carried something valuable or dangerous, something tied to her husband's past. Outside, the snow fell silently, covering the tracks of whoever might be watching her cottage. The old woman tucked the photograph into her apron pocket and moved closer to the wood stove. As she stirred the soup she was making for dinner, she made a decision. She had to uncover the truth, not just for herself, but for Caleb, and for the puppies who had given her existence a new purpose. As the weeks went by, Amelia Campos watched Thor and Nina's behavior with growing fascination. The puppies no longer acted like ordinary dogs. When someone approached the cottage, they would take up strategic positions, one at the front door, the other at the back, long before any human ear form could have heard a sound. One morning, an unfamiliar traveling salesman appeared on the road. The German shepherds immediately went on alert, growling softly until Amelia had verified who it was. The old woman realized they seemed to be assessing people's intentions, relaxing only when she showed confidence in a visitor. Even more intriguing was the communication between the two. Nina would make a subtle flick of her ears, and Thor would respond with a slight dip of his head, as if they were speaking in code. When one detected something suspicious, the other was already in position, without a single bark or audible signal. "I've never seen anything like it in all my 78 years," Amelia remarked to Caleb, as they watched the pups play in the yard where the snow was melting. The boy, who now spent nearly every day at the cottage, agreed. "It's like they were, I don't know, trained for something specific." Raquel Martin stopped by for one of her regular visits that afternoon. The young, always kind police officer brought a small notebook with her to log the animal's progress. "Amelia, try asking them to sit," she suggested, observing them intently. The old woman spoke firmly in Portuguese. "Thor, Nina, sit." The dogs looked at her, tilting their heads slightly, but did not obey. Raquel then said, "Sitzen." Instantly, both dogs sat. Their eyes were fixed, their posture perfect. "Incredible," the officer murmured, jotting something in her notebook. They were clearly trained with German commands. This confirms they aren't ordinary dogs. A chill ran down Amelia's spine. She remembered the old photographs of her husband beside Kraus, of the behavioral research. Raquel, do you think they could have been part of some kind of experiment? The officer hesitated before answering. Sergeant Elias has asked me to be discreet, but there are rumors of a special canine training project for advanced detection, something that was shut down abruptly. That night, as the puppies slept curled up near the wood stove, Amelia lay awake, watching them. When Nina opened her eyes for a moment, the old woman had the strange feeling that she wasn't just looking at an animal, but at a creature that understood far more than any dog should. The sky darkened rapidly that afternoon, bringing one of the most violent snowstorms the area had seen in decades. Amelia Campos watched through the fogged-up window as thick flakes fell without pause, feeding the wood stove to keep the cottage warm. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the woods, and Thor shot to his feet, ears on high alert. Before the old woman could react, the puppy bolted through the back door, which Caleb had left slightly ajar earlier. Nina barked in distress, but remained inside the house. "Thor, come back here, boy!" Amelia cried, her heart pounding with worry. Without a second thought, the 78-year-old woman pulled on her thickest coat, slipped on her boots, and grabbed a flashlight. "Stay, Nina," she ordered firmly, before stepping out into the frigid night. The biting wind lashed at her wrinkled face as she called for the animal, the beam of her lantern struggling to pierce the white curtain that surrounded her. The snow, already ankle-deep, made every step a struggle. Still, Amelia pressed on, venturing into the woods she knew so well, but which now seemed a hostile and unrecognizable labyrinth. "I can't lose him," she muttered to herself, remembering how the puppies had returned purpose to her solitary life. After 2 hours of fruitless searching, her strength began to fail. The cold seeped into her bones, and her breath grew ragged. Amelia stumbled over a snow-covered root and fell, a sharp pain shooting through her hip. The lantern rolled away, its light extinguishing as it hit a rock. In the near-total darkness, the old woman tried to get up, but her body no longer responded. "Thor, Thor?" she called one last time, her voice no more than a whisper carried away by the wind. It was Caleb who raised the alarm when he visited the cottage and found only an agitated Nina and no sign of the old woman. The young man immediately contacted Raquel Martins, who joined the search with proper lanterns and equipment. They found Amelia nearly buried in the snow, unconscious. The police officer quickly checked her vital signs while Caleb, with tears in his eyes, wrapped her in thermal blankets. Together, they carried her with difficulty to the police vehicle. At the hospital in Santa Helena, doctors worked to stabilize her, diagnosing severe hypothermia and exhaustion. Meanwhile, back at the empty cottage, the back door creaked open. Thor entered, soaked and panting, clutching a piece of dark, durable fabric between his teeth. On it was a partially visible emblem that belonged to no known resident of the region. The hospital room in Santa Helena had that characteristic smell of antiseptic and clean linens. Dona Amelia Campos watched the snowflakes fall slowly outside her window as a nurse checked her blood pressure. Her 78-year-old body had bravely withstood the hypothermia, but the doctors insisted she needed at least 2 more days of observation. "You were very lucky," the doctor remarked during his morning visit, "if that young man and the officer hadn't found you in time." Amelia simply nodded, her thoughts fixed on Thor and Nina. Caleb appeared at her doorway that afternoon, his red eyes betraying sleepless nights. The news he brought made the old woman's heart ache. Maya, he began, using the affectionate nickname he had created. Sergeant Elias came to the cottage today, with the official papers. His voice faltered. They're going to take the puppies away. The old woman's wrinkled fingers clenched the bedsheet. But why? They're well cared for. They said it's a matter of institutional security. Kalebi sat on the edge of the bed. Something about new state government directives. Raquel tried to argue, but the sergeant said orders are orders. Silent tears streamed down Amelia's weathered face. Those two puppies had brought new life to her lonely cottage, filling the empty days with barks and play. Losing Thor and Nina would be like returning to the darkness of solitude. When? She asked, her voice frail. In 3 days, when you're discharged. Caleb saw the sorrow in the eyes of the woman who had become his family over the past few months. A rising anger burned in his chest. Anger at the system, at the authorities, at everyone who couldn't see what those dogs meant to Amelia. I won't let it happen, the young man declared, standing with determination. They can't just show up and take away what matters to us. Amelia reached out a trembling hand, touching the young man's arm. I don't want you getting into trouble for me, my boy. You took me in when no one else would, Kalebi replied, his voice thick with emotion. Thor and Nina are our family now. In that moment, something in the 17-year-old's eyes shifted. The hesitation and fear he had always carried, the bitter fruit of years living with an abusive father, gave way to a resolve Amelia had never seen before. I'll talk to people in the community. Someone has to listen to us. Caleb squeezed the old woman's hand. It's time to show them we're not alone in this town. As he left the hospital, the young man walked with a steady stride, feeling for the first time the power of fighting for something bigger than himself. Dona Amelia Campos returned to her cottage days later, leaning on Caleb's steady arm. Fatigue still weighed on her frail body, but there was an urgency to see Thor and Nina again. As they reached the porch, something unusual caught her eye. A colorful envelope tied to the door with a blue ribbon. What's this? She asked, as the young man stepped forward to retrieve it. It was a letter, signed by a dozen women from the local church support group. The words, handwritten on scented paper, offered help with meals, company on cold afternoons, and even assistance with the puppies. Tears streamed down Amelia's wrinkled face as she read each line. I never imagined anyone still remembered me, she murmured, holding the paper to her chest. For years, she had believed the community had completely forgotten her after her husband's death. Thor and Nina greeted her with enthusiasm, jumping and barking as if they understood the gravity of the moment. The cottage, once silent and solitary, now seemed to awaken with a new energy. In the following days, women of all ages began to appear, bringing homemade soups, woolen blankets, and most importantly, conversation and laughter that filled the once empty rooms. Dona Gertrudes, the eldest of the group, brought a homemade remedy to strengthen the convalescent's lungs. Young Patrizia, a newcomer to the town, offered to take the puppies for walks when the weather permitted. Caleb, inspired by the mobilization, began attending the group's weekly meetings at the small wooden church. At first, he was the only young man among so many older women, but his sincere presence and his testimony of how Amelia had taken him in touched their hearts. There are many elderly people in these mountains who, like Dona Amelia, think they've been forgotten, he said at one of the meetings, his voice gaining confidence with every word. and there are many young people like me who need guidance and kindness. His simple speech resulted in an unexpected project. Young people from the region began to visit isolated seniors regularly, bringing groceries, helping with household chores, and most importantly, listening to their stories. The initiative, which started small, soon gained the support of the pastor and even Mayor Otavio Prado, who promised transportation for the volunteers on the snowiest days. For Amelia, watching it all from her rocking chair, it was as if the harsh winter was finally beginning to yield, not just outside, but deep within her. The Santa Helena Community Association Hall had never been so crowded. It was a frigid Saturday, but the warmth of the people filled the room. Residents from all over town had gathered to discuss the case that was now mobilizing their small mountain community. The puppies found by Donna Amelia and the authorities' decision to remove them. Calebe Silva felt his stomach churn as he finally worked up the courage to raise his hand. The murmur of the crowd gradually died down as the 17-year-old, normally so quiet, walked to the front of the hall. His hands were trembling, but his voice was steady when he began to speak. "I met Donna Amelia when I needed work and food. She took me in, no questions asked," he said, looking directly at the attendees. "The puppies were nearly dead when she found them. No one cared about them until they found out they were special." The young man continued, recounting how the old woman, despite her fragile health, had devoted herself to the animals, and how Thor and Nina had brought life back to her lonely cottage. His voice cracked as he described how Amelia had risked her own life in the storm to find one of the dogs. "We are talking about a woman who was forgotten by all of us, myself included, until I needed her help," he confessed. "Now they want to take away the very thing that brought meaning back to her days. Is that fair?" Silent tears streamed down the faces of some of the women from the church support group. Even Sergeant Elias Morera, present at the meeting, seemed uneasy with the situation. "If this town still has a heart, we need to show that we care as much about our elderly as we do about rules that nobody really understands," Kalebi finished, with a determination that surprised everyone. When he was done, a profound silence fell over the hall, broken by initially timid applause that soon swelled into an ovation. Mayor Otavio Prado, normally a reserved man, rose from his chair. "I have never heard such sincere words in this hall," the mayor declared, adjusting his jacket. "I personally promise to intercede with the authorities to review this situation. Santa Helena will not abandon one of its oldest daughters." Raquel Martins, sitting beside her superior, smiled discreetly. The young police officer knew that this moment represented much more than two dogs. It was the awakening of a community that had forgotten the value of empathy and solidarity. At the end of the meeting, many people approached to embrace Calebe. The boy who had always lived in the shadows was now seen, heard, and for the first time, truly respected. News of Donna Amelia Campos's situation spread through Santa Helena like the cold wind that swept down from the Minas Mountains. After Calebe's emotional speech, something unprecedented happened in that small mountain community. People began to unite for a common cause. In less than 2 days, a petition had gathered over 300 signatures, asking the authorities to reconsider their decision to remove Thor and Nina from the old woman's cottage. Social media, once used only for sharing recipes and family photos, now overflowed with messages of support for the puppy grandma, as many had started calling Amelia. The regional newspaper, Montañas de Minas, published a full-page story featuring a photo of the old woman sitting in her rocking chair beside the German shepherds. The article highlighted the loneliness of the elderly in rural communities and how those dogs had brought the sparkle back to the eyes of a woman the town had forgotten. Raquel Martins, moved by the situation, began organizing regular visits to the cottage. "It's my duty as an officer to ensure the safety of everyone, including Donna Amelia," she explained, while encouraging other residents to do the same. Soon, a line of visitors began to form. Women from the church group brought cakes and homemade bread. Local merchants sent groceries. Young students offered to clear the yard and chop firewood for the stove. The once silent cottage now echoed with voices, laughter, and excited barks. Jonas Barreto, the local sheriff, began to visit Amelia frequently, always bringing a treat for the dogs and a shy smile for his old friend. The glances they exchanged did not go unnoticed by the more observant visitors. Caleb, now respected by the community, coordinated a group of young volunteers who took turns ensuring the old woman was never alone. The boy seemed to have found his purpose, even organizing a photo board at the community association, with pictures of Thor and Nina playing with the children and elderly of the region. The once cold and suspicious atmosphere of Santa Helena began to transform. People who had barely acknowledged each other now chatted animatedly about how to help Amelia and other lonely seniors in the area. The small cottage in the mountains became a symbol of unity and solidarity, proving that even in the harshest of winters, human warmth can blossom. For Amelia, every knock on the door was like an unexpected gift. After years of silence, her house was once again a home, full of life and purpose. The pressure from the community of Santa Helena finally had an effect. On a cold afternoon, Sergeant Elias Morera knocked on the door of Amelia's cottage, his expression heavy with concern. He asked to come in and, sitting at the kitchen table, watched the puppies sleeping near the wood-burning stove. He took a deep breath before he began to speak. "Donna Amelia, I need to tell you the truth about Thor and Nina," the officer said, rubbing his hands nervously. "The project they came from was abruptly terminated because of the emotional risks involved." The old woman poured him a cup of hot coffee as Elias explained that the dogs had been part of a secret behavioral experiment. He revealed that the puppies had been genetically modified to develop advanced intelligence and extraordinary sensory capabilities. But the project was deemed too dangerous when the animals began to display profound emotional bonds, both with each other and with the researchers. Some of the scientists wanted to euthanize them, to erase every trace of the experiment, the sergeant continued. Others, more compassionate, decided to set them free, hoping they would survive on their own or be adopted by someone with no knowledge of the project. Amelia felt her heart tighten. It all made sense now. Their unusual behaviors, their obedience to commands in German, the metal capsule, and the coded envelope. It was no coincidence the puppies had found their way to her. "And what about Dr. Kraus?" the old woman asked, remembering the photograph she had found in the attic, where her late husband stood beside that very man. The officer's face hardened. "Henrik Kraus does not represent the federal government as he claimed," Elias explained. "He was the project's lead scientist, but was discredited when he opposed shutting down the research. Now he's trying to retrieve the dogs to continue the experiments on his own." Elias warned that Kraus would certainly try to contact her again, and that the police would now maintain constant surveillance around the cottage. Amelia thanked him for his honesty, feeling a mixture of relief at finally understanding and indignation at the deliberate abandonment of the puppies. When the sergeant left, the old woman sat in her rocking chair and called Tori and Nina to her side. The two animals approached, looking at her with an intelligence she now understood was far beyond normal. You are not experiments, she whispered, stroking the German shepherd's heads. You are living beings who deserve protection and love. That night, Amelia slept with the pups beside her bed, determined to protect them from the man who saw them only as research subjects. The storm raging outside seemed a harbinger of the confrontation to come. A heavy night fell over Santa Helena, bringing with it a dense fog that seemed to swallow Amelia Campos's cottage. The old woman was sleeping fitfully when the creak of the back door jolted her awake. Tori and Nina, instantly alert, let out low growls, their ears pricked, sensing the imminent danger. Dr. Henrik Kraus had returned, this time with no disguises or pretexts. With calculated steps, the man with the foreign accent advanced down the dark corridor, a metal briefcase in his hand and determination in his eyes. These dogs are project property, he muttered to himself as he neared the room where the animals slept. Amelia appeared in the kitchen doorway, gripping her cane tightly. You have no right to invade my home, she declared, her voice trembling but resolute. The intruder merely smiled, pulling a forged document from his coat pocket. You don't understand the importance of these animals. They carry years of advanced research, Kraus explained, advancing menacingly. The German shepherds formed a protective barrier in front of the old woman, their fur bristling and teeth bared. The confrontation was cut short by the sound of tires screeching to a halt at the cottage entrance. Headlights flooded the windows, and seconds later, the front door burst open with a crash. Jonas Barreto entered, wielding his service weapon, his sheriff's badge gleaming in the dim light. Get down, Amelia, the sheriff ordered as he aimed at the intruder. Kraus tried to flee through the back, but was quickly immobilized. We received an anonymous tip about suspicious movement, Jonas explained as he handcuffed him. It seems someone in town is keeping an eye on you. With the scientist detained in the back of the patrol car, Jonas returned to check on Amelia. She was trembling, not with fear, but with relief. Tori and Nina, still on high alert, only relaxed when she gave them a reassuring gesture. You were always too brave for your own good, the sheriff commented with a nostalgic smile, remembering the days when he had courted the then young Amelia. He lit the wood-burning stove and prepared some tea to calm her. The news of the invasion and arrest spread quickly through the small town. In the following days, residents took turns visiting the cottage, offering company and protection. Jonas, however, established his own routine, appearing every Wednesday and Sunday with extra firewood and stories from their youth to share. I suppose it took 2 dogs and an intruder for me to find an old friend again, Amelia remarked one afternoon, watching Jonas split wood in the yard. The man smiled, his calloused hands working with renewed vigor, as if each swing of the axe were a silent promise that she would never be alone again. The story of the puppies and the old woman who took them in spread rapidly through Santa Helena. Amelia Campos's courage especially touched the hearts of Marta and Paulo Resende, a middle-aged couple from the local church. After a conversation during the Sunday service, they approached Caleb Silva with a proposal that would change his life. We have a spare room ever since our daughter left for college, Paulo explained, his wife nodding beside him. We'd like you to consider living with us, away from that difficult situation with your father. The young man, accustomed to hiding his emotions, couldn't hold back his tears. For the first time in years, someone was offering not just a roof over his head, but a real home. 3 days later, with a backpack containing his few belongings, Calebi moved into the Resende's welcoming house. His new home was just a 15-minute walk from Dona Amelia's cottage, allowing for frequent visits. It was during one of these visits that the boy shared his latest discovery. I'm volunteering at the municipal kennel, he told her, as he chopped wood for her stove. The veterinarian said I have a way with animals. Amelia smiled, observing how the boy's once hesitant hands now worked with confidence. You've always had that gift, she replied, pouring hot chocolate into ceramic mugs. Tori and Nina knew it from the first day. In the following weeks, Caleb developed a routine that included school in the morning, volunteer work at the kennel in the afternoon, and visits to the cottage almost daily. During these visits, he and the old woman shared stories, recipes, and plans. It was on a rainy afternoon that the affectionate name emerged naturally. Grandma Amelia, I tried making that cornbread cake you taught me, he said, not realizing the novelty of his address. The old woman stopped what she was doing, her eyes welling with tears. It had been decades since anyone had called her by such a loving title. Childless and a widow for so long, that simple name represented a new chapter in her life. Was it any good? Was all she managed to reply, hiding her emotion. Not as good as yours, Kalebi laughed. The bond between them now transcended any conventional definition. They were not just friends or acquaintances, they were family, united not by blood, but by the mutual choice to be present in each other's lives. And as spring approached the mountains of Minas Gerais, they both blossomed in their new identities. He as a young man full of purpose, she as a grandmother at heart. The decision came in the form of an official notice signed by the regional commander of the military police. Thor and Nina could not permanently remain in the care of Dona Amelia Campos. Sergeant Elias Morera delivered the document personally, with a mixture of regret and relief. It's for the best, the officer explained, as the old woman caressed the pups one last time before their transfer. They need specialized training, and you can visit them whenever you like. Amelia discreetly wiped away a tear. She did not protest. After everything she had been through, she understood that these were no ordinary dogs. The Santa Helena military police kennel, located just 2 kilometers from her cottage, would be the German Shepherd's new home. On the first day without the pups, silence once again dominated the house. Kalebe showed up early, bringing fresh bread from the bakery and a worried expression. Grandma Amelia, are we going to visit them today? The young man asked, using the affectionate nickname he had created for her. Her smile was answer enough. Together they walked to the kennel, where they were greeted by Raquel Martins. The officer, always kind, led them to the area reserved for Thor and Nina. They're adapting surprisingly well, Raquel commented. The trainers have never seen dogs this intelligent. The animals' reaction upon seeing Amelia and Calebe was one of pure joy. Barks, jumps, and licks that warmed the old woman's heart. That visit became a daily routine. As the weeks passed, the story of the mysterious puppies and the old woman who saved them spread throughout the region. Mayor Otavio Prado, recognizing the story's potential, organized a special event where Thor and Nina were presented as the guardians of Santa Helena. The kennel began receiving visits from schools, and the pups, now trained, participated in public demonstrations. Amelia was always the guest of honor, seated in the front row, watching with motherly pride. You've transformed not only the lives of these dogs, but our entire community, Jonas Barreto said one afternoon, as he walked her home from the kennel. The sheriff, now a regular at the cottage, did not hide his admiration for his old friend's courage. For Amelia, the solution they had found was perfect. The pups were safe, well cared for, and still a part of her life. The daily visits gave her days purpose, and the affection she received, from both the dogs and the people, filled the empty spaces that loneliness had carved. Thor and Nina, with their mysterious origins and extraordinary intelligence, became living symbols of how the unexpected can bring renewal. And for the 78-year-old woman, that was a lesson she would never forget. The snow that had blanketed Santa Helena melted away, giving rise to small purple and yellow flowers that bloomed between the stones on the path to Amelia Campos's cottage. The wood stove, which for months had been the sole refuge from the biting cold, now remained unlit during the day, as the windows opened to the warm spring breeze of Minas Gerais. On the porch, the old woman rocked in her chair, watching Thor and Nina run through the yard during their daily visit. The pups, now larger and stronger, had become the most famous duo at the military police kennel, but their eyes still lit up when they saw the one who had first welcomed them. "Grandma Amelia, I brought that sweet treat you like," Calabi announced, arriving with a paper bag. The boy, now settled with his foster family, came 3 times a week to help with the small repairs the cottage always needed. His eyes no longer carried the weight of sadness, and his once hesitant hands now worked with confidence on community projects. Raquel Martins appeared shortly after, bringing the pups for their scheduled visit. The police officer, who had initially come out of duty, now sat down for coffee and to share the town's latest news. "The sergeant sends his regards. He said he'll stop by on Sunday to bring that cheese bread you taught him how to make." In the afternoon, Sheriff Jonas Barreto arrived with rose seedlings for the garden. As he dug into the earth to plant them, he exchanged knowing glances with Amelia, rekindling a story that time had only put to sleep, never erased. The cottage that once echoed only with the sound of wind in the cracks now vibrated with conversation, laughter, and the occasional enthusiastic bark. The kitchen table, once set for one, now needed extra stools to accommodate the visitors who came to share stories and plans. Seated among them all, Amelia watched her transformed life. At 78, an age when many were bidding the world farewell, she was just rediscovering her own. The loneliness that had once consumed her had dissipated like morning fog under the sun. That night, before sleeping, the old woman looked out the window at the road leading to the town. The same road that had brought the police, the mysteries, the dangers, and also the renewal. Amelia smiled, realizing that the storm that had deposited 2 shivering puppies on her doorstep had not just brought animals in need of shelter. It had given her back the most precious gift of all, the feeling of being needed, of belonging, of being alive. To begin again, after all, one only needed the courage to open the door.